Hey, welcome to the Modscast, everybody. Hope you're doing well today. Had a great comment to one of my videos asking me to expand on something that I had talked about in an earlier video. 1.3 was on conservatism and why I consider myself to be a conservative, what I mean when I talk about conservatism. Great comment with lots of questions in it. I try to keep the videos around 20 minutes, 15-20 minutes. We'll see, there's obviously a lot to say on this one and a lot of great questions in it, so I might do it in more than one, or we'll see. But the question was essentially, well, there's a number of things, but how in the recent election and the whole response to MAGA, Make America Great Again, people were saying America was never great. Progressives were arguing that we should be more like other cultures. And then the specific question, I had said in that video that I believe in conservatism is that my idea of conservatism is to remember that it's more difficult to create something beautiful and good than it is to destroy it. And he was asking, well, what about our culture makes it beautiful? What makes it worth conservatism? So, first of all, with the Make America Great thing, it never really rang with me, just because I didn't think America stopped being great, because I don't think greatness consists in perfection. I think a project like this is an exception. It's the exception to the historical rule. Project, what do I mean by that? The idea of self-rule. Look, Founding Fathers rejected the crown in England and decided to try to create a nation. And think about how crazy this is. Where instead of having a sovereign, every individual was a sovereign, was a monarch. The whole idea of your home is your castle. America, the idea took that quite literally. So that you would come in and be the monarch of your castle, and you would have neighboring monarchs, sovereigns, who could do, because what does sovereignty mean but freedom to do what you want to do, right? So to be a sovereign, the sovereign of a nation is the person who's free to do what they will. So the idea was that everybody could be a sovereign, kings and queens in their own right. And the government would only be needed to mediate those disagreements that couldn't be, and you would use local government to do that, right? You would, as locally as possible, solve those problems. And so the federal government was designed to protect this collection of monarchs, essentially, of sovereigns who were free to do what they wanted. Now, you were free to negotiate, whether it was prices, exchange of goods, exchange of services with your neighboring monarchs. That was the whole deal. What a crazy idea, right? At the time, there's a great article, and I need to remember, I'll look it up, the guy who talked about those three words, the pursuit of happiness. The idea that you'd create a nation in which people could pursue whatever they thought had the sovereignty to pursue whatever they thought was happiness was outright revolutionary. Most of the world looked on that document and that whole idea and said, you guys are crazy, you'll never make this thing work. The greatness of that idea, okay? I think greatness is not in perfection, but in the pursuit of continued improvement. And most of Western culture's history is that way. There's been no perfect culture, none. Every culture has its past tainted with sins, just as every individual has their past tainted with bad decisions and choices and things that hurt people, okay? I'll talk more about that in a minute. Winston Churchill said, success consists in little more than moving from failure to failure without losing enthusiasm. Tremendous comment. That's what it is. And people say, oh, well, Trump, look, he can't do this. Look how many businesses have failed. Well, if we're going to make failure the measure of whether or not someone's good or great or successful, and let's stay away from good or great, let's just say successful, okay? Well, Michael Jordan, right, didn't make the basketball team in high school. How many free throws does a guy miss? How many putts does a great golfer miss? Tons. You can't measure it that way. I think it's Warren Buffett. My wife has a quote. If you're succeeding in everything you do, you're attempting things that are too easy. Okay. Failure is a part of it, mistakes and stuff. So the MAGA thing, I don't think greatness consists in perfection. People say, oh, America was never great. Of course it was. It depends on how you define greatness. If you define greatness as perfection, then no. But if you expect perfection, as I've said in another video, you're not living in the real world. Perfection is not available. So, the other thing he said is that sometimes people on the left, progressives, argue against conservatism and say we should be more like other countries. My question always is, okay, well, then which of those countries would, when someone says that, I say, well, which one would you like to live in? And, you know, as far as the greatness and why it's worth preserving, you'll notice that everyone's fleeing into the West. No one's fleeing into the Middle East. No one's fleeing into China. I mean, people are migrating, but, you know, not in droves. But people are voting with their feet. And then that's one very simple empirical evidence. But this question of which culture would you have us be like? Now, most often they'll talk about socialized medicine, big state solutions, right? And they'll talk about cultures, you know, in Western Europe. Now, a couple things that are problematic there. One, the cultures in Western Europe and why we can't be like them. First of all, the only reason those cultures are able to be the way they are is because of the United States. And by that I mean the shield of NATO. You can only spend tons of money on social programs when you don't have to spend tons of money on your defense because a nation half a world away is spending tons of money for your defense, which is what the United States did throughout the Cold War. And that's undeniable. Now, I'm not resentful about that. I think, a la Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And we had the power to protect them from the threat of Stalin's communist expansion and the subsequent Soviet policies of destabilization and expansion. And we did that, okay? But it's important to understand that there's a difference. When you talk about American exceptionalism, right? American exceptionalism doesn't mean you think you're a superior human being, okay? What it means is that this system historically has afforded and created more wealth, more generosity, more freedom than any that's been before it. And that's because it was different from the outset. It was always great. It was a crazy idea, an idea that each person could be sovereign in their own right. Crazy, but beautiful. A beautiful idea. Problematic, for sure. Perfect? Hell no. But none of them are going to be, as I mentioned. Okay, but those nations that people hold up as models, okay, notwithstanding the differences between, say, America's unique in history. Most other nations, in fact, all other nations, are founded on, with the exception of, well, the Anglosphere, Great Britain, Australia, those ones, but even Great Britain was founded. Largely, they were founded along familial, tribal, geographic lines, yeah? So communities, it sprang up out of communities. Now, the United States was founded on an idea, and people from all those different cultures have come in and subscribed to that idea through the years. It's a crazy notion, very, very different, okay? It transcends those differences. That's why I think it's always been great. Okay, it set out to transcend those differences, but to recognize that that was going to be problematic. All right, that unless everyone subscribed to the idea, the pursuit of that greatness, it wouldn't work. People say, oh, you don't have to assimilate. You do. You have to assimilate to the idea that every person is a sovereign with their rights, to choose pursue the faith they want, to pursue the opinions they want, and that they have an equal right to you. That's a great thing, and you have to respect that. If you can't respect that, then you can't fit in here, all right? Other systems just don't allow that. I'm not advertising for Fallout, it's just a coffee mug. The fallacy of origin, another question he asked, is that a lot of times people say, oh, well, everything you have was built on these terrible sins and crimes. I talked a little bit about this earlier, but it's a weird disconnect often when I talk with people on the left and progressives. But progressives often, it's weird. These cognitive dissonances where they'll say, First of all, well, the fallacy of origin is what that's called. In other words, you say, well, because, be like saying, well, you can't drive a Volkswagen because that company, made a ton of money during the Second World War, or made a bunch of weapons and vehicles in the Second World War, or your Krupp's coffee maker. Yeah, the fallacy of origin. All right. Logic demands you evaluate something based on its merits, not on where it came from. And again, the logical disconnect is, well, they'll say, well, criminals, need to be rehabilitated, and they need to be given a second chance, and you shouldn't judge them, by their actions. And yet they'll judge the whole culture by its previous actions, when the culture itself was younger and less wise. And to say that is not to excuse it any more than it is to excuse, say, theft or violence when you're young in an individual, but also not to damn them for those acts. Now, again, there are some acts that I think, certainly in the individual, are reprehensible, such that rehabilitation or something isn't necessarily possible. But see, here's again the beauty of this system: is it's not an individual, and the other beauty of it is it's not a collective. It's a bunch of individuals working together. That's what's led to progress. That's what's led to beauty. Because you have a bunch of people who sit around and go, wait, this isn't right. Now, that's good. That's important. And the understanding that free interplay of ideas, wide open, is what leads to greatness. That willingness to face, that courage to face all things. Because what is an attempt to exercise control from the top down? But fear, right? And by that I mean the monarch in England, right? Those colonists have got to do what we tell them to do, or they're not, and then you have Pitt standing up in Parliament saying, look, all they're doing is what Englishmen and women have always done. And he was saying it obviously before the suffragette movement and whatnot, and before they'd gotten rid of slavery in the UK, right? But he was saying, look, this is a spirit of freedom that says no, right? They're doing what we do. They're standing up to not being allowed to have their sovereignty respected. Now that's messy, because it means you don't have the power. You don't have the control. All you have to be responsible for is yourself and your control over yourself and your choices. It's a tricky business for people to accept that. Certainly people in power, but the idea of a nation where everyone is a sovereign, of a culture in which everyone is free to do what they want to do, so long as it doesn't interfere with the sovereignty of another individual. An absolute amazing thing and a beautiful idea. And many people who I know who are on the conservative side are convinced that that's all it was, that this was a blip in the historical record, because most of human history has not been this. This is the exception. And in that case, it is exceptional. In fact, this whole system was built on the idea that your past is something you leave behind, that you can overcome. You came to this nation, whoever you were back then didn't matter. The old world was based entirely on, all power structures were based entirely on who you were. So it was familial nobility, right? Inherited lands, inherited titles, that kind of thing. And here was the deal. You were doomed by your past. So in the French Revolution, you might have been the most enlightened aristocrat ever. You may have been lobbying against your aristocratic buddies for decades to say, hey, we got to stop oppressing these people. We got to change this system. When the mob came, they didn't care. You were, the Count of, Versailles or whatever, right? You were a noble family, and those sins of the past were on you. This whole nation was built on the idea that you're not defined by the sins of the past. And the nation itself is subject to the same scrutiny and the same improvement. So that as the nation's history unfolded, as the culture's history unfolded, those sins had to be dealt with. They had to be acknowledged and recognized. And we had to be improving, but they weren't going to define us. The whole mission of this thing is you're not defined by your past, but you're defined by what you can do from this moment forward, and how you do it from this moment forward. And that moment is always new. Always new. That's a revolutionary idea. and quite frankly, an exceptional one, an exception to the rule, where most of the time rule is administered from top down, and it is not sovereign individuals who get to exercise that choice. It's the beginning of summer, and I was watching, people in RVs going camping and stuff, and looking at this huge nation and thinking, what an amazing thing to realize that people, having an RV, and think about it, we live like kings and queens, certainly like they used to, and every year things get more and more affordable and manageable. What a miracle that is. The homes we have compared to what most of the world has. Now, are the sins of the past lamentable? No question they are. And we need to not shy away from them. To be conservative and say this is a beautiful thing is not to say that it hasn't been less than it could be. In fact, in this case, it is to say it is beautiful precisely because it has improved. No society is perfect. All societies have crimes in their past. But it's important to remember that we're not defined by those acts, by those failings or shortcomings, but instead by our movement past them. Now, as for what makes the culture beautiful, as I said earlier, people vote with their feet. People are struggling to get into the West and then to undermine it. Not deliberately, not consciously, but because we're not adequately making them understand that you have to subscribe to this idea that each individual has the right to pursue happiness the way they want to, and you don't have the right to impose that on anyone else, whether it's a system of belief or an ideology of some kind. You can pursue reason, debate, discussion, and try to improve things that way. Such a unique thing. To say nothing of, you want to know what was beautiful about Western culture? Like, as I argued, the Declaration of Independence, Shakespeare. If you've seen the cathedrals in Europe, they're beautiful, amazing things. Art, Bach, Beethoven, music. This culture, Western culture, independent, and what has it been but that spirit of a pursuit of something greater? Now, any one of those things can be said to have been built off the backs of sins, but if that were the case, then you would argue that an individual whose parents had stolen something at some point in their lives, right, had done something wrong at some point in their lives, didn't deserve it, couldn't be considered great. Wouldn't you argue that somebody and we say this all the time, somebody whose parents were drug addicts or criminals who becomes a tremendous success story, right? Whether in politics or athletics, whatever, we call that a tremendous success story. So what a great person that is, to have overcome that adversity. And that, you would never judge them based on their past, right? You would say, wow, what a great thing. Now that's the fallacy of origin. Whereas you could say, well, everything they have, they got because someone stole it. I don't think that's the case. That's the fallacy of origin. And can you prove that? Can you say that had they never done that, they wouldn't have done it anyway? And if they sit there and tell you how sorry they are about what happened in the past and that they're trying to make up for the past, doesn't that make them great? The fallacy of origin is to claim that something's bad because it came from someplace bad. And that's juvenile reasoning. And it's a logical fallacy. If you weigh Western civilization's benefits, you will see, again, as I've mentioned, the highest standard of living, the greatest amount of individual expression and freedom. Works of art such as you won't find in the rest of the world. The list goes on. And more than that, as I've said, people are trying to come into Western civilization at the very time that Western civilization no longer seems to know why it's so great. Because they think that claiming your society is great means you think you're a superior human being. That's not the case. In fact, the beauty of this system, the reason it's exceptional and beautiful, is because you don't think you're a superior human being. It's a society that says that no human being is superior to another. At its very core, it says that. Now, has it lived up to that all the time? No. But it's continued to go, wait, we need to do this better. That is what makes it beautiful. It's a society that says, we're going to try to do something here that's never been done before, because it's worth trying to do. And even if we're not perfect, failing in pursuit of that is better than living under a king. We'd rather die and fail in pursuit of our individual sovereignty than we would live under the sovereignty of another power. That means we're going to make mistakes, because we're human beings who grow and learn. And we learn as a species, not just as an individual. But the collective power of individuals learning and reflecting, individuals, not as a collective, learning the same things, but individuals going out, diverse experiences and understanding, hey, this isn't right, this isn't working, I've been thinking about this, and bringing it back to the group and sharing it, talking, progressing. That's what real progress is. The so-called progressives, that assumes that the glass is always half empty. It assumes that history is a movement away from negative, and that we're always falling short of some realizable ideal. And that, to me, is a negative view. That's a resentful view. To come back to an image I've used before, resentment and gratitude. Gratitude is we're moving further away from bad things. And that is what makes us exceptional, because we're committed to improving perpetually. Regardless of whether or not, we're not going to achieve perfection. We can't. Are we better now than we were yesterday? That's the individual's duty. That's the society's duty. And that's what this society has dedicated itself, what Western civilization has dedicated itself to, hitherto. Improvement. Not the pursuit of perfection. Or rather, the pursuit of perfection, but not with an understanding of it as any realizable goal. Because if we measure it against that, then yeah, if perfection were able to be made real, then yeah, we would be a disappointment. But even that, you would say, well, but who's to say how far close to perfection we're supposed to be by now, right? The thing that I say is in one of my poems, and if you're interested, I can give you a link. For those of you that like poetry, I can give you a link to my poetry book. But we don't really see any more than we did about the things that really matter, right? Why are we here? The fundamental deep question. But we are less blind than we were. And that's what we pursue. That's what makes this country exceptional, what makes this civilization exceptional. And the empirical evidence, again, is undeniable. And those who criticize it fail to recognize that the very fact that they can criticize it in the way that they do, on the technology that they do, without having to worry about the things that the vast majority of humans throughout history have had to worry about, things like basic survival, food, water, shelter, oppression. The fact that they can do that stuff without worrying about that is what makes it exceptional. And the failure to recognize, and more importantly, to defend that, is what's the greatest threat. That resentment and dwelling on the negative. So, the culture, again, trying to remember and left open dialogue that it's much more important to do right than it is to be right. Doing right means recognizing that you didn't do something right earlier and fixing it realistically, right? Changing it. You may not ever be able to make up for it. I'm a good 12-stepper, I learned that. You may not ever be able to make up for it, and often you can't. You can't make it as if it never happened. But you learn from it and you move on. Not forgetting, mind you, but incorporating and understanding that brokenness is part of who we are. And overcoming that brokenness repeatedly is what makes us great, not never having done it. Anyway, some thoughts on that, a bit longer than usual, but Hope you enjoyed it. Send me comments in the section. Yeah. Thanks for watching. Cheers.